begin again, welcome to this Australian Centre for International Trade and Investment webinar. My name is Pru Gordon and I'm the Executive Director of ACITI, as we like to call it. We're very fortunate today to have with us Mr Pradeep Mehta from CUTS International. And for those of you that haven't heard of CUTS, we are going to delve into what CUTS is, its role in the Indian policy landscape, and also its mission. But we're so pleased to have Pradeep because he's just an incredibly experienced and insightful person on a whole range of topics related to India's foreign policy and India's domestic policy. And I've had the great pleasure of sitting down and chatting with Pradeep. He has so much knowledge. I thought it would be crazy not to share that with more people, particularly at this point in time where Australia and India are trying to really build their relationship. So we did try and run this webinar a couple of weeks ago, but unfortunately due to technical difficulties and Pradeep and I being caught on the run, the quality of that webinar was not good enough to play. So Pradeep has very kindly agreed to join us again. So thank you so much for Pradeep for joining with us. I thought we might begin by hearing a little bit about your background and in particular your founding of the CUTS International Society.
Thank you, Pru. I am very pleased to be here again with you to have a free-ranging chat, as it were, covering a very large number of issues, and particularly with the focus on Australia-India relations, which is not only trade, but also strategic relations in the context of the Quad and so on. Having said that, we are a 40-year-old global public policy research and advocacy group. We started off as a consumer protection organization in 1983 in India. But over time, we graduated to do a lot of public policy work for the simple reason that we thought it is important to pursue consumer welfare as against consumer protection alone. And consumer welfare can only be an outcome of several economic policies and governance issues which impact people like you and me in whichever country. And in this process, we have been associated with Australia for many, many years and have celebrated our 30th anniversary as well as our 40th anniversary in Canberra. In fact, on the 30th anniversary, we had your very noted Foreign Secretary Peter Varghese, who spoke. And his speech was such a good thing for India to understand as to how liberalization helped Australia to grow. Otherwise, Australia in the 70s and 80s were also following a protectionist policy like India was doing now. Our liberalization happens in fits and starts, unfortunately, for several reasons. This is not the space to get into many of that because some of them may be politically incorrect as well. The fact is that many of our industries are very shy of globalization for silly reasons, if you ask me. And there are many advocates on the other side of the fence, which includes me, which continues to tell them that you have to delve into the deep end of the pool, without which you'll not be able to swim. Now, having said that, why we got into international trade was July 1991, about the time when the Uruguay round of the WTO, not the WTO then, Uruguay round of the GATT was at its peak. And there was a consumer congress, a World Consumer Congress, where many of our northern friends, northern allies, talking about trade policy, about trade and agriculture and so on. And most of it just went over my head. Now, having been a student of law and economics, I could understand it if I made the effort, which I did, and realized that in the whole of South, except in Malaysia, there is no group which is working on international trade and globalization. That is the time when we stepped into international trade policy issues. In fact, we were one of the first in India, I would say, and one of the few first in the whole of the global south. In 1996, we expanded to Africa when African NGOs also sought our advice as to how are we dealing with this. In 1996, by the time the WTO had already come into being. So we had a very simple model group that we were not opposed to globalization or trade liberalization, but we were in favor. At the same time, we were also combating or fighting against the inequities in the system, which several exist even today. Give you an example where I know, India and Australia have a great difference, is the issue about public stock holding of food grains, for example. Now, Australia has a great interest to get into the Indian market, but on the other hand, what they don't understand is that in India, agriculture is more of a livelihood issue than a commercial issue. We don't have commercial farms in India. All are self-driven by farmers. And the fact is that the agreement on agriculture, which was drafted in the wake of the WTO system itself, was defective, was flawed. The base price on which they looked at to calculate the government subsidies was 1988-89, which did not make any sense because inflation had already happened by then. But unfortunately, Pru, at that point of time, our negotiators were not so well clued up on many of these things, so they ignored it. And they couldn't understand the impact of what is going to happen today, which is happening now, is that we are unable to come to a conclusion, the international community, on what we want. And Australia, being the leader of the Keynes group, with great interest in agriculture, is a strong opposition to it. And we hope that the Australian trade negotiators would understand this, that in the context of even bilateral relations, it is often important for us to be partners on multilateral issues. There has to be a give and take on this. And that is what I would like to make a plea through this particular webinar, that the public stock holding issue, if you look at the genesis of the same thing, there's an iniquitous agreement in the agreement on agriculture, clause 18.4. The base price, which was chosen, was irrational when inflation had already taken place, and therefore, if that is 18.4 is appreciated and the base prices are revised, then you'll probably find that the subsidies which are given in India are not. And mind you, it is a consumer issue as well, too. The public stock holding, basically what it does is provides cheap food grains to the poor in India. And we have a very massive public distribution system, which is a food safety, a food security measure. Now, mind you, if you look at in the world around today, food security has become a very major issue. As we speak, the G20 in Brazil, which is talking about several issues, the main theme is on food security and hunger. So you are dealing with an issue which the Australian trade negotiators or Australian policymakers must understand that these are very sensitive issues and they have to be looked at in totality rather than particularly in a mercantile manner. This is not a mercantile issue. This is a plea. As it is, I mean, what is the harm being done to Australia's agriculture exports? I don't think so. Now, what we are looking at in the same context of the bilateral trade agreement that we are negotiating with Australia, we already have one, the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, which is now being renegotiated to turn into a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, which means there will be closer ties with Australia and across goods, services, and agriculture. Let me give you an example. Denmark, dairy manufacturing, dairy companies have opened up dairy plants in India. We have abundant milk supply. We have abundant egg supply also, by the way. So there are a lot of raw material which is easily, even Australian dairy companies can come and open plants here and export to other parts of the world. That is a policy which government of India has adopted, make in India, make for the world. It is not an autarkic policy as is often misunderstood. But make in India, the promotion which the government has done is to ensure that industrialization continues to take place. No, don't forget that our unemployment is very high. And I would say more of underemployment rather than unemployment. Look at our agriculture sector, mainly which occupies 65% of our population. A very large population is underemployed in the sense that they are not getting the full kind of benefits. So we do require industrialization, and that, in the end, as I often say, will increase the market. Once the market increases, then any country, and mind you, we're reducing our tariffs on a regular basis. We're coming down, and we are still high. Some of the tariffs are still high as compared to Australia.
No.
But
You
sorry?
cut straight to the most sensitive issue, I think, in the Australia-India relationship, and I'm so pleased you did. One argument I often make when I'm teaching on international trade and investment is that to have a successful negotiation, negotiators have to be as conscious of the domestic circumstances of their negotiating partner as they do of their own. So I think you highlighting the domestic situation in India, that's really informing India's approach to trade negotiations on agriculture in particular is spot on. I mean, it's critical that we understand that. I would just say, I think it's not necessarily the lack of access, but lack of access to the Indian market for Australian agriculture is very important. But often I think it's because of India's size, it's the uncertainty in policy that almost causes as much, if not greater, problems for traders wanting to work with India than with maintaining a policy on stock holding, for example. So, as you know, with the chickpea import bans, which was really introduced very rapidly without any real forewarning. So I think that caused major problems for Australian chickpea exporters. So I think I get your point that we really need to understand the domestic situation in India and be able to support that through our trade negotiations. But for me, India, it's about creating greater certainty in the market as well as greater openness because of your size. I mean, India's a massive consumer market, but also you produce a huge number of agricultural products and other products, but so many of them are consumed domestically. But now you're increasingly engaging in global markets, which it is like, you know, the elephant in the China shop. It's when India does things out of unexpectedly, it can cause major shockwaves to other trading countries.
True, as it stands today, we are a net agriculture exporter.
Which is fascinating, which is incredible,
yeah.
Really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, rice, for example, we are exporting in a big way to Africa, Southeast Asia, and we keep on coming out with very knee-jerk reactions. When prices start going up, we suddenly ban exports. And we have written against it as it's not going to be helpful. I didn't know about chickpeas, but then it's very, very sensible. I mean, chickpea is not a food good in that sense. I mean, it's not a food staple that, unless there are farm lobbies which are behind this kind of ban which happened. I didn't know about it, but it's interesting to see as to now there could many goods, but they have to be looked at within the political economy context other than the actual policy context as such. As I said, wheat and rice in policy context are certainly no go, and public stock holding is something which we are continuously engaged in. We have good reserves, and in fact, some extra. We in fact even exported wheat from those reserves after getting a kind of an agreement at the WTO with all the interested parties. That yes, what's the point? The wheat will just rot in the godowns, the warehouses.
You made a good point about India now being a net exporter. now we've obviously got Prime Minister Modi elected for his third term, and there have been some clear signs that he is much more willing to look at the opportunities created by international markets, both for strategic reasons but also economic reasons. Can you talk a little bit about Prime Minister Modi's approach to India's international relationships? Because obviously with China's rise, a lot of countries are looking at trying to diversify away from China. You know, Australia has a China +1 policy. How is Prime Minister Modi positioning India to sort of capitalize on those opportunities?
Well, there's a very, very clear direction which the government of India has adopted in China +1. In fact, as you know, we speak here in Rajasthan, we're organizing an investment summit, and one of the channels that are being explored by government of Rajasthan is to look at companies operating in China who wish to shift to India. So there is a very clear identified sort of set of things, and then see as to how we can bring them into our own state. I mean, all states are doing that, so it's not just Rajasthan. They're all looking at possible enterprises who wish to shift from China to elsewhere. Now, Vietnam is far better off than us in many of these instances, particularly on ease of doing business and so on. But some of our states are very progressive, so that is happening. Now, that is again part of the of Modi's bigger vision of taking India forward. As I told you, he's launched this campaign on Make in India. So he's clearly open to international trade, understanding that that is where our future lies, and getting into the supply chains. Now, our only problem with many of the agreements, like where Australia was interested, that India joined the RCEP, for example. There was a very strong move by Australia and Japan to push India into it, and India nearly agreed. But the reason for that was even in Australia and Japan realized that, look, if we have China in this agreement, we also need India to counter it. Now, India is still very hesitant about the Chinese factor without understanding that China is anyway our biggest trading partner today, simply on gravity, gravitational terms. I mean, the prices are low, supplies are good, and businesses continue to deal with China, number one. Number two is China is also selling goods to India via other countries. You know, their own subsidiaries in other countries which are selling goods to India and services to India. So there's a very big debate now. The only problem is that where is it we can draw a balance? I think Modi himself is not is quite flummoxed. We don't have a very competent trade minister, to be honest. So, like, there's a very big debate in India on Chinese foreign investment into India, which is welcomed by most of the commentators have welcomed it. You do your screening. You only allow them to enter into non-sensitive sectors. We're not saying that you allow them to join your defense sector or whichever. But even that has been opposed by the minister. When the minister of finance is saying it should be done. So in any case, foreign investment is kind of is both under the finance ministry as well as the commerce trade ministry as well. Finance ministry has the last say. So let us see how it evolves. But what I'm saying is that this reflects from the bigger vision of Modi is that, look, somewhat like Deng Xiaoping, who said that it doesn't matter what the color of the cat is as far as it catches mice. Modi hasn't said that, but a lot of his actions reflect this particular metaphor, as it were. Now, I see, now the only problem is that Modi now in the third term is in a coalition government. In the earlier two governments, they were coalition governments, but his own party had a majority on their own, a full majority in the parliament. And therefore they could, they were sort of much more in a commanding position as against now. So there are a lot of policy decisions that they take which then turn around. I mean, what is called U-turn, which then reflects the whole confidence of the government machinery in the government directions and the policy directions as to whether they should follow it or not, because of the kind of the procrastination or kind of U-turns which are happening. To give you a simple example, we have a system of, unlike, we have a rigid hierarchy in our civil services system. We're all recruited post-college and so on. And they continue in various branches of the government. Now, what government has done in the past is to bring in experts on what is called lateral entry at various levels. So experts. So this was attempted this time. Now, in our system, whether it is elections or it is jobs, there's a reservation system. Reservations for the disadvantaged groups, which is a very valid system. Like the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes. I mean, these are two disadvantaged groups. Now you have a third disadvantaged group called the backward classes. And Modi belongs to the backward class. So there is a thrust on these three groups of people that they should get positive discrimination in all sectors, including in these jobs. So that the government then suddenly made a U-turn and cancelled the advertisement inviting applications for the lateral entry experts. Just giving you a small example. Now, all these send the wrong signals around in the government, in particular the bureaucracy. So look, this government is not very clear-headed, and how they approach issues.
Which is not good for investment, is it? It's not good for foreign investors when even
exactly.
Yeah.
Foreign investors, yeah, I agree. I mean, any of these issues is not good for the. You'd be surprised, Pru, but there's a lot of money from India is going out.
Do you know where it's going?
Out all over the world, and particularly in Europe and US and more advanced countries. Like Australia has a lot of Indian investment, by the way. Let's not forget that.
No, and we welcome it. I mean, in foreign investment.
So what I'm saying is that we need more money in India, but yet it is going out for several reasons. People want to, keep their eggs in various baskets and cut the risks.
I guess, we're called the Australian Centre for International Trade and Investment because we see investment as the flip side of trade, that it's not a negative outward investment. It can be a real positive in terms of accessing alternative inputs and technology. But one question I had, and that was about India's approach to trade agreements, partly because, as you know, we've just had another round of negotiations between Australia and India on the ECA, I think it is. But also India's had some really interesting positions in the World Trade Organization, which I know you're very involved with, in part of Ngosi's Secretary or Director General Ngosi's advisory body. As you mentioned RCEP already, but it seems that India has quite often played a spoiling role in the WTO without any really good, clear reasons for doing so. One example I'd give would be the joint statement initiative on investment for development that was recently concluded. I think there were about 98 countries, including many, many developing countries involved.
126.
126, okay, I stand corrected. A lot of countries. And in many respects, it seems like an agreement that would fundamentally benefit India and fundamentally benefit many of these developing countries. And yet India has been strongly opposed to the inclusion of these joint standing initiatives into the WTO multilateral system, which just seems counterintuitive because of the benefits, but also because the rules would seem to benefit India in as much as they would help provide the certainty that investors and traders need to invest and trade with a country like India.
Let me respond to this, Pru. India has a very preset notion that the WTO is a multilateral organization and therefore no non-multilateral deals should be discussed. This happened in Buenos Aires, all the JSIs. Even there, India had opposed it. Now, we and many others in India have argued against it, including the former Industries Minister Suresh Prabhu, who unfortunately had to leave the government. I mean, the problem is that they have taken a very rigid stance, which is like the Investment for Development Agreement. Uh, I I told the government, I said, look, why are you opposing it? Don't join it. No, it will spoil the whole structure of the WTO. You can't say because it's coalition of the willing, and if they're not seeing anything here, are you not entering into FTAs? Why are you entering into FTAs? Those are also non-multilaterals. So one can't understand as to how they think of. Then in the Investment for Development Agreement too, I also wrote, on the other hand, you want to be a leader of the global south. We've just recently done the third Global South Summit, which is virtual. 120 countries participated in that. Now, in the context of the IFD agreement, I spoke to several ambassadors in Geneva personally who I know, that particularly from LDCs and developing countries, and they were very pissed off with India. Why did they oppose it? So this is what I told them. I wrote about it also. I said, look, well, I didn't write their names. That would have destroyed my friendship with them.
Yes.
And neither I'm going to speak about it publicly, who told me this, but several did. This is something which India itself is doing. I said, look, IFD is basically ease of doing business. No, by using this, it then opens the door for an investment policy. You keep on hearing all these guys. And we have some idiots in our policy framework who have those kind of ideas, and they are former bureaucrats. So the government listens to the former bureaucrats better than they listen to us. So we have this kind of tragedy, and as I said, was that our trade minister is not a very smart one, and he continues to harp on these issues. And can you imagine? One of the rumors which they spread around here on the IFD was it is a China-led instrument. I said, what? China is going to be a member of it. How does it gain by IFD? It doesn't gain anything. It already has deep pockets. It has strong arms. It is able to get things done in any country the way they want. Any developing country. They don't need any agreement to do it. They have a checkbook to get it done. They have a big checkbook. Which you don't have.
So how does cuts, I mean, you obviously are a voice in the wilderness trying to put forward these sensible ideas for joining these agreements, but that must be incredibly difficult trying to counter this it seems to be a very instilled sense.
Well, unfortunately, we had a very obnoxious ambassador in the WTO in the past who was gone. I don't know, but the new ambassador has to follow the instruction which he gets from the head office.
It seems yes, it's very surprising. I should say we have people online. If you would like to ask a question of Pradeep, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat function. Either of those will work. So please feel free to pose your questions. Yes, it's you wonder what it will take for India, because you see these early moves towards recognizing the opportunities and capitalizing on the opportunities of the global market. But we seem to have a long way to go still before India's really, I guess, a key player. I mean, you are a key player really just by your size alone. It's just this analogy of the elephant in the china room keeps coming back to me.
True, but I must share with you an example of India spoiling things at the WTO in Geneva. Or even a ridiculous thing like my appointment on the NGO advisory board. That was raised as an objection by the Indian ambassador in the General Council. Can you imagine? Don't they have anything better to do? I mean, the constitution of the NGO Advisory Board or the Business Advisory Board by Ngozi. And mind you, Ngozi had sent around this information to all the ambassadors much in advance. Like, look, I'm going to set up these two boards, and these are the people I propose. If you have any objection or any comment, please send them. And nobody did. And then India goes ahead and makes an objection in the General Council. That is a kind of stupidity that they do.
Mm.
What more can I tell you about my own country?
Well, it's really pleasing to know that there's an organisation like yours out there fighting the good fight, in my opinion. Can I touch on the role of the Quad? Because that's obviously beyond trade and investment. And that's looking a lot at issues like critical technologies and
right.
ways to cooperate in building alternative supply chains. And I think critical minerals is a key area where the Quad are trying to work together to build alternative supplies of critical minerals to feed both environmental goods as well as some technology in the defense area. What's your view on the ability of the US and Japan and Australia and India to work together to build these sort of alternative supply chains in critical minerals in particular, but any other technologies?
No, I think this is a very useful collaboration, particularly in the context of the kind of the evolving geopolitical scenario, where China has anyway got most of these critical minerals. And how are we able to overcome the kind of problems that we might face unless we are able to come up with more there is a
yes, there was a question. If people are unable to use
the problem
function, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Either of those should work. And we are receiving questions on, well, it wasn't a question, it was just a comment on the Q&A.
Just a comment that she's not able to, I think it was a lady who said she's not able to listen.
I think she said the chat function wasn't working, but the Q&A is, so feel free to use that.
Okay.
So just, getting back to critical minerals, because in some respects, it seems to me that we're actually talking about managed trade in some of these goods, because that seems to be the only way to secure sources of offtake for developing particular critical minerals. When China is such a dominant player in critical minerals, it seems the only way we're able to build alternative supply chains is by actually managing trade, which involves governments. And as far as Australia is concerned, that's never really worked in the past. And it's something that we sort of try and avoid like the plague, because it's governments directing where resources will be invested and managing markets. And we've sort of come to the conclusion that government's not great at that. That said, we've got this new Future Made in Australia policy, which is all about investing in strategic sectors. So whether that can work internationally, I'm not sure, but I guess it would be, are you hearing anything in India about how the Quad countries might work together on critical minerals?
Pru, Australia and India have an agreement on strategic minerals. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
We have a bilateral agreement, and that has to be looked at.
It's a very light-on agreement. I think it's not binding in terms of agreeing.
No, I know. Yeah, but it's a statement of intent.
Yes.
Sort of best endeavor kind of thing, like especially differential treatment. No, but at least it is something that there is an understanding upon, which then allows us to build up, particularly as think tanks and civil society groups like you and us can continue to pressurize government to move forward. I would imagine that these kind of the problems which might arise in the kind of supply would have to be dealt with on a case-to-case basis. you can't have a blanket kind of remedy for it. The blanket remedy is yes, that we agree to cooperate. And we'll agree to find ways as to how within the Quad and the Quad Plus. There's already a Quad Plus kind of happening, Indonesia, etc. Many others have sort of the second concentric circle of the Quad. There are others also who are joining in, and that is something which has to be looked at as to how you deal with that. But as I said, remedies can only be found on a case-to-case basis rather than on any kind of. You can't have a broad brush remedy.
No, I think it's going to be more difficult than people imagine it will be to sort of build these alternative supply chains. But there's definitely a lot of money going into it.
Yeah. No, as I said, it will all depend upon your need and the availability of a particular mineral, for example. Then how are you going to find it? If you find it difficult to get it, can you find another way how to get it? Can you find different ways? And the advantage you have here too is that India continues to maintain a good trade relation with China, and it has a good political relation with Russia, which the others don't have, US or Australia or Japan. That could be an advantage to Quad rather than to be looked at as a disadvantage. I remember during, we've been buying oil from Iran for a long time, and the US, in spite of its sanctions, decided to keep a blind eye. Did not bother about it because they realized that Iran has to be, Iran needs the money and so on. That and if India is doing it fine. They all know that India is not a hostile nation. We have never been hostile. We have never attacked any other country in our whole 5,000 years history. And we'll continue to be, and we have declared strategic autonomy. That means we are not going to be allied with any country, but we'll remain friends. And Russia has been a long-term, always a friend for India, which we are not going to give up for the sake of. But our friendship with US is going up. In fact, as it stands, if you look at the defense equipment that we get, this is dominated by Russia, but increasingly US is now creeping in and also becoming a big partner. That is something which we're looking at Australia also to look. How we can expand our defense cooperation. We are doing that in the oceans, the Malabar exercise, etc., excellent. But in terms of defense equipment, is something which is what we see a very good scope for the partnership. Now, these kind of partnerships will help to even cement the political relations as well.
It's interesting because Australia used to have much more of a hedging strategy when it came to China. We absolutely wanted to have a cooperative relationship with China for many reasons, but particularly because of the trade and investment interest. And we've had traditionally a strong relationship with the United States because of the ANZUS Treaty and for a whole bunch of reasons. But over time, and following, China's actions imposing trade barriers against Australian goods in particular, it gets more and more difficult to be friends to everyone. You sort of are asked to make choices. Now, India might be able to avoid that because you are so much bigger than Australia. But whether the US or China might be asking things of India that make it more aligned. I'm not sure how India would align with China considering issues on the border there. But whether over time that ability of India to be able to be friends with Russia and China and everyone, whether it's going to get more difficult if the US in particular asks India to I guess be more supportive of policies that the US is pushing.
We are supportive. Let's not forget that we can change our friends, we can't change our neighbors. And China is a big troublesome neighbor for us. They're keeping on eyeing our property for the simple reason that the border which was drawn by the British was absolutely fluid and not very clear. in any event, my personal opinion is that China should not have been our neighbor. It's Tibet, and they have occupied Tibet, uh, which even India agreed to. Which even India agreed to. Uh, agreed with the sovereignty, and that is something which we would like India to, turn around.
Mm.
Say that, look, this is stop. But then, see, a lot of these things have to be looked at in the totality of the geopolitics which is happening. For example, India is a very strong candidate as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Now, all this has a bearing on many of these issues that we're talking about.
Mm.
Between India and China, Modi and Xi had a good rapport to begin with. They had 2 summits in China and 2 summits in India. And they arrived at what is called the Wuhan spirit of the last summit that they had. But what happened to that? It's just gone for a 6. So you find, they attacked some of our, and mind you, we share a border with them, and both respect the agreement that nobody is going to use arms. So there's no gun fired at all in all those fights. They're all hand-to-hand battle, with clubs and so on and so forth. Clubs started with nails also. Can you imagine?
Wow, that's amazing.
But we still respect the basic agreement that no arms and ammunition to be used.
Mm.
So what I'm saying is that where you can agree on something and then you move forward on that. Now, as I said, on trade, Chinese investment is flowing into India in any case. After this, this whole issue about the difference between our trade ministry and the finance ministry.
Mm.
So I don't see any reason why we cannot have better relations with China. At least we agree to disagree.
Mm.
We can have an agreement to disagree that, look, okay, let's forget the boundary issue and put it on the back burner. Many countries have done it.
Mm.
Russia and China have done it. They have a border dispute. Who doesn't have a border dispute if you share a border?
Mm. Yeah, it's a very good point.
Unlike Australia, US, which are
Yes.
sort of huge.
You've got a lot of sea between us and everyone else.
I don't think the US has border dispute with Canada or Mexico.
Well, they've got an issue with Mexico. I think that's why they've got that wall built down south. But yes, not all. I think there was a war in the 1850s, but
yeah.
Not recently.
That's why you have a New Mexico province in US.
Effectively, almost, and Canada, really. I know it's a separate country, but in so many ways it's really integrated with the US. Coming back to Australia, you said you can't pick your neighbours, but you can pick your friends. Australia has a huge diaspora of Indian people in Australia now. It's a growing population in Australia. So what do you think is there anything that would move the dial in terms of the Australia-India relationship that we could do?
They will. Pru, let me give you an example from the US where we have a very strong Indian diaspora, which is now going to happen in Australia as well. We have, increasing number of educated and well-to-do Indians who are living in Australia or doing well. And they are an important part of your society as compared to any other migrant class of the recent origin, not people like you who arrived from Britain or wherever.
Yes.
So so they are becoming very influential in the sense that if you look at their ability to conduct business, etc., including they're in politics. I met a lot of parliamentarians and legislators in Australia who are from Indian origin, and they all are doing pretty well, sort of well assimilated. Now, we had this. I don't know if you heard of that U.S. That nuclear deal that we had with U.S. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Which allowed us to stop being a pariah in the nuclear system, and it opened an avenue for many things, including supply of uranium from Australia. Unless we were a member of that agreement, that may have been difficult for Australia as well. Now, to a large extent, the US, that 1, 2, 3 agreement was pushed by the Indian diaspora within the USA. to a large extent. I'm not saying the only extent, but they were very influential. I mean, I know friends of mine, Indians, who were influential in moving the needle.
So
So diaspora will
inevitably,
have a role to
yes.
play in terms of the relationship that we build up over time, and an imperative role, I would say.
Hmm. We've only got a few minutes left, so if anyone does have a question, please put it up now. Otherwise, forever hold your peace. But in terms of, again, moving the dial, how likely do you think it is that we're going to conclude this expanded trade agreement with India? I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical, I have to say. I think it's going to be very difficult.
Well, they are talking, and the intentions are very clear, provided, as I pointed out earlier in our conversation, that if those Australians realize what our sensitivities are, deal with that and look at it as more as a long-term process, and allow, a lot of things will happen organically, Pru. They may not happen inorganically, but they will happen organically.
I was actually surprised we even got the first
and we
one.
are interested, once we are able to get more Australian investment into India, the trade will expand.
Yes, but that's difficult because India is so complex and large. People, I think a lot of businesses don't know where to start, even though they'd like to. So I'd love to do more sessions at ACITI on India and the investment environment and the regulations impacting on investment, just to help Australian business better understand how you can get into the Indian market.
Mm-hmm.
That's the plan.
No, I agree with you, Pru, that, we ourselves are dealing with the kind of regulatory environment in India in a big way. And we are trying to make effort. Government of India is also, state governments are also making all the efforts to see to it that things are better than what they were in the past. But things move slowly here because it's a mindset issue also. Then, unfortunately, no longer to the extent that used to exist, but we have what is called the East India Company syndrome that cuts across India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And the East India Company was the British colonialists who came into India, who were the first traders who came into India in the 16th century, 17th century. And therefore, and then they became masters of this whole subcontinent. That is what is something which has diminished substantially. But I remember 20 years ago we had done a project on investment. It was so dominant. East India Company syndrome. No, those people will come and take away all our. To give you a very ridiculous example, when the issue of the WTO was being discussed in the late 90s, early 90s, before arriving at the Marrakesh Agreement, US Trade Representative Carla Hills had come to India. And at that time, there were protests by farmers on the streets of the opposite the industry house, like your KC building, where farmers were protesting that our neem tree would probably be owned by a US multinational. Now, you know what a neem tree is, a very famous wild tree, but it contains so many medicinal properties. And a lot of neem extracts are now being used by medicine companies for various purposes. So that is the kind of misunderstanding because of the patent agreement or the TRIPS agreement which happened.
But you would say things have changed. I mean, when you look at Mumbai and
it's changed. Yes, it's changed. But there are still some people who still have very leftist ideas. We should not open up our borders to anybody, without understanding that this happens to create more jobs and adds to economic growth. Another example, there was a report on e-commerce released by a research organization in India, which looked at the business and consumer welfare both from the kind of the evolution of the e-commerce industry. The minister came and started lambasting Amazon. Amazon indulges in predatory pricing and so on and so forth. Amazon may be about 2% or 3% of our market. And they're dominant. Walmart is also a big player. But then, you just send a wrong signal to foreign investors. As a minister, if you come in, then he withdrew the statement. See, what these large companies do that deep discount selling. Now, of course, consumers get stuck to that, but it doesn't mean that it is something which is always predatory. It may not be predatory. Maybe just simply a marketing strategy.
Or it could be predatory.
Sorry?
Or it could be predatory.
It could be, but it could be just a simple strategy to gain customers. And not necessarily raise the prices after you got the customers. Because you still have the option. There are no entry barriers for anybody else to come in through. Particularly your brick and mortar stores are still existing. You said they're shutting down, which is nonsense. This is not happening in India.
I think once India starts to see some of the big gains from exports and from international investment, I think that's a really important turning point when people see India doing well internationally. And I think there are examples already. I know in Australia, for example, we tried to get better recognition for Australian lawyers and professionals overseas. But talking to the professional bodies in Australia, a number of them were very opposed because they thought, well, we would have to allow foreigners into Australia and they would compete in lower standards. But it wasn't until they actually saw the opportunity for Australian professionals to work internationally where their mindset changed and they went, oh my gosh, this is huge. Particularly for the universities who saw if we could get recognition of Australian qualifications for working internationally, then that makes us that much more attractive for foreign students. So I think with India, as you say, it's going to take time, but undoubtedly there are going to be more and more examples of big Indian companies succeeding on the global market, which will really, I think, resonate back home in India.
I agree. As I mentioned, a lot of things are going to happen organically.
Yes.
And the role of Indian diaspora is critical.
Yes. Helps us all understand as well, I think. Get a better understanding of where other people are coming from.
Exactly.
We've come to the end of our time. I just love speaking to you, Pradeep. It's always such a pleasure. You have so much knowledge and experience, and it's such a joy.
No, in fact, we are all looking forward to a longer relationship with you and ACITI.
Yes, that would be wonderful, and ACITI with cuts. So thank you to those who joined us online, and this webinar will be available on the ACITI YouTube channel for those who were unable to join us live today. So please, can I end by thanking again Pradeep Mehta from Cuts International for joining us for this webinar. Thank you so much, Pradeep.
Let me thank you, Pru, for inviting me and having this very freewheeling chat. And some of the things which I said should not have been said, but then, but that's my reputation.
Yes, I'm sure that will all be fine.
A spade is spade.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.